Here begins tape number 1 in the deposition of Prudence Jackson, MD, in the matter of Kevin Tolson versus St. Agnes Healthcare Incorporated et al. In the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. Case number 24C12008-071. Today's date is August 5th, 2013. The time is 10:57 a.m. The video operator today is Brian Mackey. This deposition is taking place at the offices of Anderson, Coe & King, 7 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland. Will counsel please identify themselves and state who they represent?
Rodney M. Gaston, and I represent the plaintiff, Kevin Tolson.
Danielle Dinsmore, present on behalf of Dr. Jackson, Kirpashaw, and the M-Care entities.
Robert H. Baus, Jr. on behalf of the same defendants.
Mary Pat McGuire on behalf of defendants Caroline Stell, RN, and St. Agnes Healthcare.
Court reporter today is Tony Thompson of Merrill Ladd. Will the reporter please swear in the witness?
Please raise your right hand, Doctor. Please solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I did.
And Rodney, just before you get started, I want to just state for the video record, for whoever may be watching this later, that Dr. Jackson is on call today, and so she may have to respond to phone calls or text messages throughout the course of this deposition, and we will certainly try to make that as brief as possible.
Thank you. Good morning, doctor. Would you please state your name and address?
Prudence Jackson.
And from St. Agnes address?
Yes.
So you're employed by someone else at this time other than St. Agnes Hospital?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Doctor, my name is Rodney Gaston, and I represent Kevin Tolson in an action that's currently pending against you and other defendants in the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. The action pertains to medical care and treatment Mr. Tolson received at St. Agnes Hospital emergency room on December 3rd, 2009. We're here today for that incident, and I understand that you were one of the physicians who provided medical care and treatment for Mr. Tolson, so that's why I've asked you to appear here today to answer some of my questions. Have you ever been deposed before?
Sorry?
Have you ever been deposed before a situation like this
deposed?
where lawyers asking you questions in an office setting?
No.
Okay. I want to go over briefly the rules for the deposition so we can all get an accurate accounting. The court reporter is here to take down the questions and answers. It's also being videotaped, but the court reporter is perhaps the most important person. In order for her to take down the questions and answers, the answers all have to be verbal. In our normal everyday life, we occasionally will shake our head or nod or say words like uh-huh and uh-uh. And the court reporter can't take down that. So I'll ask that all of your responses be verbal, if you would. Also, in normal everyday conversation, there's a tendency to anticipate the question that the person's asking you or may ask you, and there's a tendency to interrupt the person before they get through the question. But for today, what I ask you to do is just be a little patient. Wait till I finish asking my question before you answer it, because the court reporter can't take down both of us talking at the same time. Now, if at any time I ask you a question you do not understand for any reason, you have to let me know that immediately. Stop me. So, Mr. Gaston, I don't understand the question, and I'll try to rephrase it so that you understand it. Otherwise, if you don't interrupt me and let me know you do not understand the question, we will presume that you've answered the question truthfully. So far, have you understood everything I had to say?
Yes.
Okay. Doctor, can you briefly describe for me a little bit about your medical education, where you went to medical school, and your work experience?
I went to medical school at Howard University College of Medicine, and I trained in emergency medicine, and I have been working in that field since then.
When did you graduate from medical school?
1987.
And when did you become licensed as a physician in the state of Maryland?
1988.
1988. Are you board certified in any field of medicine?
I am board certified in emergency medicine.
And when were you board certified?
1994 and again in 2004.
Okay. And after medical school, can you tell me briefly the hospitals that you worked at?
Yes. Franklin Square Hospital, St. Agnes Hospital, Carroll County Hospital, Walter Reed Army Hospital, Homewood Hospital before they closed. Several other hospitals that I did locum tenens work with.
Okay. And since you became licensed to practice medicine in the state of Maryland, have you also had the opportunity to supervise physicians' assistants in emergency room settings?
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like that you are aware of the standard of care that will be applicable to doctors such as yourself for practicing medicine in emergency room settings, and also aware of the standard of care that would be applied to physicians' assistants whom you supervise in an emergency room setting. Would that be a fair statement?
I'm just going to object to the form and foundation.
You can still answer.
Would I be aware of the standard of care? I don't know exactly what you mean by that. The standard of care is supervising them.
Okay.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
I'm glad you told me you don't understand the question. Let's go back a little bit forward. Let's go back just a little bit. What is your understanding of the definition of standard of care in the field of medicine?
Accepted practice.
Can you be a little more specific than that?
My interpretation of it would be the accepted practice for doing things across the medical field.
And is that definition applied to doctors as well as physician assistants?
I don't know if you can say, does it apply to doctors as well as physician assistants? The standard of care is a standard of care. It applies to those that work in the medical field.
Which would include a physician assistant that you supervise. Would that be a fair statement?
I'm just going to object to the form and foundation and the vague nature of the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're getting at. What are you getting at, sir?
Well, let me ask a question in a different way. When you supervise physicians' assistants, are you aware, or do you have to be aware, of the accepted practices within the field of physician-assistant medicine that they are required to follow and carry out?
No, I have to be aware of the standard of care and the practice of medicine in general. There's no separate standard of care for them.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, are you aware of the standard of care for physicians' assistants?
What is this? I mean, you're trying to apply a separate standard. You're trying to apply something to them that. Are you asking me how they should be supervised? What exactly are you asking?
No, ma'am. Let me go back again. We've already established your definition of the standard of care for emergency room doctors such as yourself. You told me what that is.
What did I say? What did I say?
You said it's the accepted practices for the way that doctors do things in the field of medicine. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what I'm trying to say is, because you supervise physicians' assistants, I would presume that you have to know the standard of care that applies to them for the manner in which they do things in a hospital setting. Would that be a fair statement?
I'm just going to object
I
to
don't
form
think
and
that's a fair.
I'm going to object to form and foundation, and I think what we're struggling with is you're not being specific enough.
Well,
Perhaps if you provide some more detail as to the.
In order, you do supervise physicians' assistants, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And part of your supervisory duties, you have to evaluate the way in which they examine a patient, the way in which they run diagnosis, and the way in which they provide medical care and treatment. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, we do look at those things.
Okay. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is, in order to do that properly as an emergency room physician such as yourself, do you have to be aware in the manner in which they are supposed to carry out their duties?
I would say that I should be aware of how things are to be done in the practice of medicine in order to supervise them. But there's no specific set of standards of care for them, which is what it sounds like what you're saying.
No, I'm not suggesting that there's a different standard of care, but what I'm suggesting is there's a standard of care for physicians that you've described. Do you believe it's the same standard of care that would apply to physician's assistants who you supervise?
Objection, form, and foundation.
I would say the standard of care applies to all medical providers that are practicing medicine, including physician assistants.
Okay, all right. Now, and over the course of your medical employment as a physician, can you tell me how many physician's assistants you have supervised over the years?
Oh, I don't think I can give you a number, but there have been quite a few.
More than 10?
Yeah.
Probably more than 20?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay. And with your employment, while you were working at St. Agnes Hospital, can you tell me what the shift work was like? What shift you worked? Were you the only doctor there? Were there other doctors there? How many nurses were there? How many physician's assistants were there?
And working at St. Agnes in the urgent care department, I did various shifts. We had an evening shift and a morning shift in the urgent care. There's usually one physician, and there's usually one physician assistant. There may be one or two nurses.
Okay. And what is it, a 12-hour shift that you work?
No.
What's
They were 8 and 9 hours.
8 and 9 hour shifts?
Mm-hmm.
And for the evening shift, what time would you arrive?
The latest shift, they changed hours. The latest one was 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. And the morning shift, what time would you arrive?
That was at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it looks like usually for your shift, there would be yourself and one physician's assistant who would be assigned to the urgent care department at St. Agnes Hospital.
Correct.
Now, when I'm talking about the emergency room department, is that the same as the urgent care department?
No, sir.
Okay. Explain to me the difference between the emergency room department and the urgent care department.
The urgent care department is for non-emergent cases, for those individuals who have non-life or limb-threatening issues, and for other minor illnesses and conditions. The emergency department can do everything the urgent care can, plus take care of the life-threatening, limb-threatening issues.
Okay. And is there a separate set of physicians, physician assistants, and nurses who man the emergency room itself?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Now, when a patient comes in the emergency room for evaluation, who makes the determination whether they go to the regular, I'll say the ER, or the urgent care department where you are?
Sometimes it's the triage nurse, and sometimes it's a physician assistant who may be working in the rapid evaluation unit out front. And sometimes the attendings may decide if asked, if involved.
Okay. And are you familiar with the various categories of triage?
In 2009.
Yeah, we're all talking about December of 2009.
Yeah, what do you mean, what categories?
Do you
I
know?
never did triage.
You've never done triage before?
No.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that you're not familiar with the types of categories of medical conditions and injuries that would place a patient in level 1 versus level 2 versus level 3 or versus level 4 or 5?
I mean, I could say that I know that the level 1 and 2 would be more acute patients, higher acuity patients.
And do you know which level Mr. Tolson fell into on December 3rd, 2009?
I don't recall. I'd have to look at it. But it would have to be, you know, level 3 or higher.
Level 3 or higher?
Mm.
Okay. Now, do you know the distinction between a level 2 or level 3 category of triage?
3 is less acute. 3 is kind of on the border, I believe. We may be able to go to the main, may be able to go to urgent care. Those are less acute patients. Generally, they come to the urgent care, though.
Now, if during the course of an evaluation of a patient in the urgent care department, you rendered a diagnosis and evaluation that the patient's condition was more urgent than a category 3 or 4 triage, which the patient needed to be in the regular emergency room, would you as a physician have the ability and the authority to change the triage and send the patient over to the regular emergency room for treatment?
I would say yes. I mean, we would, after evaluation of the patient, if we felt that this patient needed a higher level of care, we would discuss it with the doctors on the other side and try and make a transfer.
Now, Dr. O'Shea, what's been marked as exhibit number 1, which is a notice of deposition, and
Sorry.
that document required you to bring, that notice of deposition required you to bring certain documents and items with you to your deposition here today. And I'm going to go over each of the items and ask if you've brought them with you. And your attorney can assist with us if she'd like with respect to that.
And I can probably expedite it. She doesn't have anything responsive to the notice other than the CV.
Okay. You don't have Mr. Tolson's medical records for the ER visit at St. Agnes Hospital on December 3rd, 2009?
Dr. Jackson doesn't maintain medical records for patients. Those would be maintained by St. Agnes. And to the extent counsel had those records, we've already provided them.
Okay, so you do have those records in your possession, the emergency room records from St. Agnes Hospital for Ms. Tolson's admission on December 3rd, 2009?
Only the ones I gave her.
Okay. Have you looked at those records in preparation of your deposition today?
I did review the emergency room visit for the 3rd and kind of skimmed through the rest of the material.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about what else you scanned through?
That's it.
How about his return visit to St. Agnes Hospital?
I may have looked through that. Yeah.
Look through that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how about the chart for where Mr. Tolson was transferred to the University of Maryland Medical System? Did you also?
I didn't look through that indeed.
You didn't look through that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an understanding of his course of medical care?
You mean what happened to him?
Yes, ma'am.
I do have an understanding.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is your understanding briefly?
You mean after I saw him during that visit?
Yes, ma'am. After your visit?
From what I was told, he returned a couple of days later after developing a occlusion of his artery, and was treated by us at St. Agnes and ultimately transferred to University of Maryland.
Is your understanding that he had to undergo an above-the-knee amputation of his left leg?
Yes, it is my understanding.
Okay. All right. Do you agree that the medical care and treatment he received in this case after you treated him, which would be the follow-up care at St. Agnes Hospital, and then the care at University of Maryland Hospital, which would include the amputation of his leg, was fair and reasonable medical treatment?
Objection. I'm not going to permit Dr. Jackson to respond to that question. She's not being offered as an expert witness on the topics that you just asked about. She's here as a fact witness to talk about her care and treatment of Mr. Tolson on December 3rd, 2009.
Well,
An objection on behalf of St. Agnes Hospital as well.
And I also add that she has testified that she scanned the chart from St. Agnes following December 3rd and that she has not looked at his medical records from the University. So there's no foundation for her to respond to that question.
Well, you do understand that he had to have his leg amputated, correct?
That's what I was told.
Okay. And during your deposition, I'm allowed to ask you whether you admit or deny certain facts in this case. And I'm also permitted to ask what you claim in this case as a defense. And the reason I'm going over this is that when we get down to trial, the plaintiff has the burden to prove that the medical care and treatment he received was fair and reasonable. And that's why I'm asking you this. If you admit that, I'm going to ask the question again. If your lawyer wants to instruct you not to answer the question, she could do so, but I simply want the record here that I'm trying to obtain an admission from a defendant in a case on medical care and treatment, which would then alleviate my burden of proving that issue at trial. So I'll ask you again, do you admit that the medical care and treatment Mr. Tolson received after he was seen by you, which would include the medical care at St. Agnes Hospital and the medical care at University of Maryland Hospital, which ultimately resulted in the amputation of his left leg, was fair and reasonable medical treatment?
I'm going to continue with the same objections as previously stated and add, based on your restating the question, that your question calls for attorney-client privilege and attorney work product, and we do not admit that Mr. Tolson's medical care following December 3rd, 2009 was fair and reasonable, and that's your burden to prove, and that's what you need to do.
Okay.
Objection by St. Agnes as well.
Doctor, what facts are you aware of to support your claim, if it is a claim, that his medical care and treatment after you saw him, which would be St. Agnes Hospital and University of Maryland Hospital, was not fair, was not reasonable?
Objection.
I'm going to object, and I'm going to instruct the witness not to answer because, again, it calls for attorney-client privilege and attorney work product. And the claim that was made on the record was by counsel, not by Dr. Jackson.
Doctor, item number 2, we ask you to produce for any documents, photographs, videotape slides that you have or have reviewed for this case. Do you have any of those items?
No.
We also ask you to produce documents, medical treatises, textbooks, other articles reviewed by you in preparation for your deposition. Do you have any of those?
No.
Have you reviewed any of those items?
No.
Okay. Do you intend to rely upon any medical textbooks, treatises, or articles in this case?
None in particular.
Do you intend to give any opinions in this case?
Dr. Jackson's not going to be offered as an expert witness to testify on the standard of care on anyone else other than the care and treatment that she personally rendered to Mr. Tolson.
Okay. I still need to know if you intend to give any opinions on the witness stand.
I just told you what she's going to offer opinions about.
I'm sorry, I thought you said she's not going to give opinions on standard of care.
Exactly. She has no opinions relative to standard of care on anyone other than depending on how questions are asked at trial or in this deposition, she may offer opinions as to her own care and treatment of Mr. Tolson.
And I need to know what opinions you intend to offer on your own care and treatment of Mr. Tolson.
Check the form and foundation and the general nature of the question you can answer.
So you want to know what opinions I want to offer on my care of him?
Yes, ma'am, because those are the only opinions that your lawyer said that you intend to give. So the reason I'm here, I need to know all of those opinions. And the second part of that would be I need to know all of the factual basis for those opinions. And we can go down one by one, and I'll go slow with you, and I'll give you as much time as you need to answer that question.
And I'm going to object to the form and foundation and the fact that it calls for a narrative. Dr. Jackson may testify as to her care and treatment of Mr. Tolson and offer opinions depending on what she's asked at trial. That you can, if you can answer the question.
Okay. I believe Mr. Tolson had appropriate care during the time that I took care of him at St. Agnes.
Okay. And can you tell me the basis for that opinion, that he received the appropriate care?
Objection to form and foundation. Go ahead.
He was evaluated properly and he was treated correctly based on the findings I had at that time.
Okay. And why do you claim he was evaluated properly?
Again, object to form and foundation and the general nature of the question.
I mean that he had adequate care. He had the care that was needed at that time.
Okay. What is the proper evaluation that you claim you provided to Mr. Tolson?
Object to form and foundation.
He had a history, physical done, appropriate testing, and appropriate disposition.
Okay. Who took the history from Mr. Tolson?
I did.
Okay. You actually, first off, do you have a recollection of treating Mr. Tolson at the hospital?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I want you to, we'll go back, we'll go over line by line, but I want you to tell me everything that you personally remember about Mr. Tolson, the treatment that he received from your own recollection, if you would, back on December the 3rd, 2009.
Okay. Mr. Tolson presented to the urgent care department with an injury to his knee, having stated that a gate fell upon his knee, came down upon his knee. He was evaluated, examined. A history was taken by me. He was evaluated by me. Physical exam was done. He had x-rays done, a full set of x-rays, and he was discharged with medications, crutches, with instructions to follow up with the orthopedic doctor and his doctor.
Okay. Was anyone there when you took the history from Mr. Tolson?
He had, I don't recall who was there. The PA was with me. I think he had a visitor in the room.
Do you remember how he came into the emergency room?
No, I don't remember.
Do you remember if he was on a stretcher or a wheelchair?
When I saw him, he was on the stretcher. I don't recall how he came into the door.
Your recollection is that he told you a gate came down on his knee?
That's correct.
Can you describe that in any greater detail, the mechanism of his injury?
He was walking through the gated area, and someone accidentally let the gate down and hit him on his knee.
Are you talking about an overhead gate that
That's
came
what it
down?
sounded like to me at the time,
Okay.
yes.
And do you know how this overhead gate actually struck him or struck his knee?
He was not very detailed himself. He said, came down and hit his knee.
Did you ask the person who was with him to provide a better detail of the history of the injury?
Objection to form and foundation.
No.
Is it important to obtain an accurate history regarding the mechanism of injury from the patient in order to properly evaluate and treat a patient?
Objection.
Objection.
In this case, I got the most complete history that Mr. Tolson could give me. I went through step by step what happened with him, and that's the best he could give me at that time.
And is it important to obtain a complete medical history as to the mechanism of injury in order to appropriately diagnose and treat a patient's injury?
Objection.
Same objection.
Yes.
And the reason that it's important is because understanding how the injury occurred will help to point the physician in the right direction with respect to the parts of the body that are injured. It may also lead you into making a decision as to the right diagnostic studies and tests in order to properly evaluate an injury. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection.
Objection.
It does add to the diagnosis. It does help.
Okay. Was Mr. Tolson triaged before you actually saw him?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how many occasions, tell me how you physically examined him, if you would, from your own memory.
I came into the room. I sat down on the stool beside his bed. I palpated his pulses from his hip to his toes. I asked him if he could feel my fingers. I asked him to move his toes. I palpated the knee area. That was it.
Doctor, if I show you Mr. Tolson's medical chart, can you tell me which notations you actually made in the chart yourself?
I can.
You can just refer to the page of the chart. You can tell me which is your handwriting and what notations you made.
He wants you to flip through.
Oh, he wants me to.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought he was going to give me the page number.
No, he wants you to use these Bates numbers at the bottom of the page. This looks like the chart provided by St. Agnes that she
I was going to
has.
say, what records are we actually looking at?
These are the records that we provided counsel on disc. They're paginated and they're numbered.
Are
So
they
those are your-
paginated and hand numbered?
They are. They're Bates stamps at the bottom.
Right,
Okay.
Dr. Jackson, just for everybody else's benefit, when you're referring to a page number, could you also try to identify what the document actually is?
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
So the question is, in case you forgot, he wants to know where you actually documented in the chart.
okay. Page 00011, it's St. Agnes Emergency Department Service Record, dated 12/3/2009. I have my signature here, and on 00012, part of the St. Agnes Service Department record, I have a note saying that the patient was seen with the PA, and I agree with her care, and my signature, as well as my signature
Okay.
on the, I don't know what page this is, but
That's why I was
13.
Okay, we went through page 11, page 12, and now we're up to page 13. Are you referring to page 13 because your signature is at the bottom of page 13?
Yes, sir.
Okay, doctor, you can continue. You can go through the rest of that chart.
Oh, also page 15 and 16.
All right, what's on page 15, if you would, please?
Page 15 is the last, is the sheet of the Emergency Department Service Record. Looks like it's,
I'm sorry, the reason, is it because your signature's on that page?
yes.
Okay, go ahead, doctor.
And 16 is the order sheet.
Okay, and the reason you picked out 16 is because your signature is on that page, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any other pages that has any of your handwriting on them?
No, not that I can see here.
Okay. Doctor,
Can we just make sure it was 11, 12, 13, 15, and 16? Are
That's-
those the pages identified?
that's what I have.
Thank you, just checking.
Okay. All right. Doctor, when you indicated that you physically examined Mr. Tolson, where did you write the notes of your physical examination in his chart?
I didn't need to because the PA initially saw the patient and she wrote the chart up. And I don't need to write a whole physical exam. I need to review and write a note that I've reviewed it.
Okay, hang on a second. Are you telling me that the physician's assistant was the person who initially did the entire physical examination of Mr. Tolson?
Yes.
Okay. So, when was the first time, if you can tell from the chart, when you saw him? I mean, we have a time that he came in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what time you were in his room?
Before he was discharged.
But I mean, we're talking a couple hours here. Do you have any idea what time that you walked into his room to conduct this physical examination?
No. All I can tell you is I saw him before he left.
Do you remember doing the physical examination, or is that something you assumed you did because of your note in the chart?
I absolutely remember.
Absolutely remember?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you didn't write the results of your physical examination in the chart, would it be fair to say that you're unable to recall them 3 years later?
Objection. This characterizes her testimony where she's testified what she remembers about the examination. He's saying,
Okay.
he's
I
asking you.
remember.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
I remember.
You remember?
Yes.
Okay. What areas of did his leg did you check for pulse?
All of them.
I don't know what all means, doctor. You got to tell
Okay.
me. You got to define them for me by anatomical structure, if you would,
Okay.
or location.
Go ahead.
Femoral artery. Popliteal artery.
Popliteal artery.
Yes. Dorsalis pedis. Posterior tibial.
Anything else?
Those are the main arteries of the leg.
Okay. How about the foot?
I said dorsalis pedis and posterior tibia.
And that would be in the foot, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. And is there a scale of 0 to 4, 0 to 5 with respect to the strength of the pulse that you find in a patient's leg? Do you quantify that normally?
Sometimes we do, yeah.
Do you know if you quantified it in this case?
I mean, I know he had pulses that were brisk, so that would equal a 3+.
3+?
Yes.
Did you note that anywhere in the chart?
No.
Okay. Now, when the physician's assistant did check the pulse, do you know what number she used for the pulse?
Well, if I reviewed her notes, she said 3+.
And where's the 3+ at? What page?
Page 12.
Page 12?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where do you see the number 3+?
At the bottom of her note.
Is that where it says pulses, and then there's a number, and then next to that is a plus sign, and the letter B and L? Is that what you're looking at?
I think that's what that says.
Do you believe that's a 3 and not a 2?
Yes.
Did you talk to Ms. Krupra at any time after Ms. Tolson was discharged from the hospital on December 3rd, 2009, up to today's date about this case?
I'm just going to, okay, well, to the extent you could answer that question without divulging attorney-client privilege, then you can answer it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't speak with her specifically about what she graded the pulse. No.
No, I need to know if you talked to her about this case after December 3rd, 2009, when Mr. Tolson left the hospital till today's date.
Separate and apart from anything you may have discussed in the presence of counsel with her.
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. Now, so you checked all the pulses, and how do you check the pulses? Just with your finger?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And what other, did you do a orthopedic examination?
Objection to form and foundation.
Meaning, what do you mean by orthopedic exam? Part of the orthopedic exam is pulses.
Well, why don't I ask you that question? What does a thorough orthopedic examination consist of for a patient like Mr. Tolson, who presents at the emergency room with trauma to his left knee and left leg.
And just to be
Objection.
clear, you need a thorough orthopedic examination by an ER doctor?
By this doctor. Yes, by you.
Objective form and foundation.
Objection.
When I examining Mr. Tolson in the urgent care for this type of injury, I would check the pulses, I would check the function, and color and temperature. Can't always, well, that's what I would check.
How did you check?
I'm sorry, your voice is sort of falling
I'm
off.
sorry.
Yeah, if you could just keep your voice up a little bit.
I will.
Okay.
Okay. Have we covered the pulse check that you did? Have we covered that thoroughly? Have you explained that to me, what you did with respect to checking his pulses?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about functioning. When you talk about functioning, are you talking about the functioning of the knee joint itself?
To as much as it can be checked in an acute injury.
I don't understand what you said by that.
Well, when you have an acute injury to a joint, you can't always move it around and bend it like you want to. But what I was determined to do is make sure that he had functioning distal to the injury, proximal to the injury, all around the injury. As well as you can't always move an acutely injured part.
How come you can't always move an acute knee injury part?
It's painful for the patient.
Well,
And
notwithstanding...
they won't let you,
Notwithstanding, I'm sorry, the patient won't let you?
sometimes.
But there's no indication in this case that Mr. Tolson would not let you examine his leg, is there?
Objection.
Objection.
Mr. Tolson let me examine his leg, yes.
He let you examine it, Mr. Tolson let you examine his leg, is that an accurate statement?
Yes, he let me examine his leg.
Okay. Now, simply because the patient has pain, are you saying that that prevents you from doing a thorough and complete examination of the knee itself to determine the functioning?
Just objective form and foundation.
You can still examine the knee as much as possible, even if, you know, they have pain. And Mr. Tolson had good range of motion. He was able to flex his knee, it hurt, but he was able to definitely move his toes and wiggle his foot.
He was able to flex his knee. Okay. And does that mean drawing the knee back up against the back part of his thigh? That
No.
type of flexion?
Not full flexion. He was having pain from the knee.
Okay. Are you familiar with the degrees of flexion that you would find for a patient without injury?
I could estimate the degrees of flexion, yes.
Okay. And how many degrees of flexion did Mr. Tolson have when you examined his knee?
At that time, not much.
Well, I don't know what not much is.
I would say, you're asking me to guess now.
No, I don't want, no, ma'am,
I would say-
I do not want you to guess. Please don't guess. What I want you to do is, based upon your own recollection of this examination, which is over 3 years ago, can you tell me what his range of motion was with flexion of his knee?
It would have to be about 15, 20%.
15 to 20% of normal?
Yes,
So he lost 80% of his ability to flex his leg at the time you examined him.
no, I
Form and
wouldn't,
foundation.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, if he
I
only
would
had...
say that he was in pain, and that's all it allowed him to do at that time.
Okay. Well, there's active flexion and passive flexion, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Active is what you ask the patient to do. Passive is what you do with the leg, with the limb itself, correct?
Correct.
Okay, when he went to 15 or 20%, which is all he can do, did you then passively extend the leg farther back to see how much more extension that he had?
No,
Why not?
he was in pain. He was uncomfortable.
So your examination of Mr. Tolson was limited to what he himself could do up to the point he said it hurt, and then you didn't ask him to do anything more.
It wasn't needed.
Object to the form and the term limited. You can answer.
It wasn't. Say your question again, I'm sorry.
Your examination of his flexion was, you asked him, how far can you flex his leg? He only flexed it 15 to 20% of normal. He said it hurt. And then you didn't ask him to go any farther with that, and you didn't try to do a passive motion to see how much more flexion he had at that time. Would that be accurate?
I would say yes.
Okay. That's the flexion. How about the extension part?
It was fully extended.
Fully extended?
Mm-hmm.
Are there orthopedic tests to determine the stability of a patient's knee?
Objection. Can you be more specific? From the perspective of an emergency room doctor?
No, I want to know in the field of general medicine, on an orthopedic evaluation, are there tests that doctors such as yourself can perform on a patient to determine the stability or instability of a patient's knee?
Objection.
You can check, there are tests that you can use to check for ligament stability.
Can you tell me what those are, please?
There is the Lockman test for lateral collateral ligament testing, and the drawer test for the bigger ligaments.
Okay. Anywhere in your report did you note that you performed a Lockman's test?
No, because those are something that you don't do on an acutely injured knee all the time.
So you did not perform a Lockman's test on Mr. Tolson's knee. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate.
You did not perform a drawer's test either on Mr. Tolson's knee. Would that be accurate?
No.
Okay.
Yes, that would be accurate.
That would be accurate. Okay. What are the other tests that you can use to check for stability other than the Lockman's and the drawer's test?
Objection to form and foundation.
Those are the two main tests.
There's no other ones that you're aware of?
Objection.
I'm aware of some others, but they're not practical for the practice of emergency medicine.
Okay. Tell me what they are, please.
Objection.
There is a McMurray's test to check for cartilage tears or instability. Cartilage tears, rather.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you did not use the McMurray's test on Mr. Tolson in this case?
Objection.
It really didn't make any sense to do that at the time.
Well, that means you didn't do it.
I did not do it. It was
Okay.
not warranted.
All right. McMurray's test. Is there another test?
Objection.
Those are the ones that we use mainly in emergency room.
Lockman's, drawers, and McMurray's. Would
Yes.
that be fair? Okay. All right. Now, well, what, if any, conclusion did you reach with respect to the stability or instability of Mr. Tolson's knee if you didn't use the 3 tests that physicians usually use to measure stability in a patient's knee?
Objection to form and foundation.
Stability is not an emergent condition. That can be checked during follow-up. It's not a limb-threatening condition.
Well, how about the reason for the instability?
It doesn't matter. If there's no limb-threatening condition, it can be checked later during follow-up by the orthopedic doctor.
Okay. Does it have to be a limb-threatening injury before you will perform stability examinations on a patient such as Mr. Tolson?
Objection to form and foundation.
It wasn't warranted on him, okay? And I may do it on some patients if, if there's no limb-threatening condition, if they're not in so much discomfort that they will allow me to do it. You do it on someone and that much and discomfort, you don't get an accurate testing.
So you do it on some patients, but you don't do it on all patients. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, in the main reason for not performing it on Mr. Tolson is because of his level of pain. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection. Mischaracterizes her prior testimony.
Yes.
Okay. Now, are there ways to eliminate a patient's pain in the emergency room so that a full orthopedic evaluation of Mr. Tolson's knee instability could have been assessed?
Objection.
He had the fullest exam that he needed at that time.
Yeah, but my question was...
There are ways to alleviate pain, yes. But
Okay. And what are the ways that you could have alleviated Mr. Tolson's pain to be able to perform the test to determine whether his knee was unstable?
I would not be alleviating his pain just to do those tests. I would be alleviating his pain to give him some more comfort. I would not, that's not my goal, to alleviate all his pain just so I can do ligament testing. That's not the goal.
But in this case, he was prescribed pain medicine, correct?
Of course.
He was prescribed the lauded 1 milligram by IV administration, correct?
Objection.
Let me see. Yes, according to this record, he was.
I think, did you have to sign that order?
I signed it, yes.
He was prescribed the lauded. He was also prescribed Toradol. Would that also be a pain medication?
Yes, that is given for pain.
Okay. Now, so even though you didn't prescribe the pain medication so that you could then be able to perform the test to determine whether there was instability in his leg, after he was prescribed the pain medication, did you go back and then try to perform a thorough orthopedic evaluation of his knee?
I'm just going to object because your question assumes that she assessed Mr. Tolson for the first time prior to him receiving the pain medication. You haven't established that.
Okay. Can you tell me whether or not you saw him before or after you prescribed the pain medication for him?
No, I can't.
Okay. You wouldn't prescribe pain medication for a patient unless you saw him and assessed his pain level, correct?
He was seen already by the PA, and she ordered the pain medicine.
She ordered the pain medicine.
Yes, she did.
What time did she order it?
Whatever time is on this sheet here, on page 16.
On page 16?
Yes.
Okay. Well, can you tell me when you saw him according to this chart?
Objection asked and answered.
Is that a no?
I do not recall the exact time that I walked into the room to see him.
Okay, so you can't tell from your own memory or from the chart whether or not your evaluation of Mr. Tolson came before or after he received the pain medication. Would that be a fair statement?
I cannot say that.
Okay. Yeah. How soon before he was discharged did you see him, if you can remember? Or how close to the point of him being discharged did you see him?
I can't say. I don't remember.
Okay. Did you approve his discharge?
Yes.
Okay. What time did you approve him to be discharged?
Probably shortly after I saw him, pending. I mean, it would have to be if he had all his testing done at that time.
Can you tell me from the record, can you give me a reasonable estimate?
About what time I approved his discharge?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
No? Okay. All right. Now, who... So, from your own recollection, the only range of motion testing that you performed on Mr. Tolson was flexion and extension of his knee. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection. You're just talking about the knee or the whole limb?
No, the knee. You extend or flex the knee, it requires an extension or flexion of the lower part of the leg, correct?
Well, the leg goes with the knee, but
Right.
those are the movements you perform
Right.
on the leg,
Right. I think we're talking about the same thing, doctor, but
on the knee, rather.
the only range of motion testing you performed on Mr. Tolson would have been deflection and extension testing that we just talked about, correct?
Objection.
Objection.
Is-
Correct.
Okay. Now, so you didn't check the range of motion in his ankle?
Oh, yeah. Check the range of motion in his whole leg.
Oh,
Ankle,
where-
I told you earlier he was able to move his ankle, feet,
He's able
toes.
to move his ankle?
Ankle, feet, wiggle his toes.
Able to move his ankle and foot?
Yes.
And where did you note that in the chart?
Oh, that was, I didn't note it. It was already noted by the physician assistant.
Okay, where does the physician assistant note that Mr. Tolson was able to move his ankle and foot?
It's hard to read, but if you look at the bottom of the 12,
Bottom of page 12.
she writes full range of motion.
Full range of motion for what?
You'd have to ask her. But
Okay.
I know from my own exam that it was ankle, foot, toes.
Okay, but from her chart, we don't know what body part she's referring to, correct?
You have to ask her that.
Okay. Then when Mr. Tolson came into the emergency room, was he able to move his ankle or foot?
When I-
Question, I'm sorry?
When he first came into the emergency room, was he able to move his ankle and foot?
You're asking from her recollection.
From your recollection, do you know if he was or not?
When I examined it, he was.
Okay. When he first came in,
I didn't examine it when he first came in.
from the note, from the chart, was he able to move his left foot when he first came to the emergency room?
What note?
Page 2.
You're looking at the triage assessment?
It's page 2, adult triage assessment. According to that assessment, was Mr. Tolson able to move his left foot?
Just going to object to the term assessment, but you can answer.
That's what she wrote. I don't agree with it.
Okay. So you disagree with the triage nurse's assessment that she made that Mr. Tolson was unable to move his left foot?
Object, form and foundation, and then term assessment, but you can answer.
All I can say is Mr. Tolson was able to move his left foot when I examined him.
No.
You have to ask her why she wrote that.
No. But you did read the chart while you were examining Mr. Tolson, correct?
Object to form and foundation.
Just went and saw the patient. I was presented the patient, and I went and saw the patient. I didn't read every note on the chart, no.
Did
I
you-
went to make my own assessment.
Did you read any of the chart at all when you came in to examine him?
No.
Isn't it the policy at the hospital that when a physician such as yourself comes in to examine a patient, that you ask for the patient's chart and you at least review the chart to see what other providers have done for the patient before you come in to examine him?
Objection to form and foundation.
No, that is not the policy.
Okay.
The policy is for you to review the patient and get your own history.
Is it also the policy to provide your review in writing in the chart?
Objection to form and foundation.
To clarify, please?
Right. According to your testimony, you physically examined Mr. Tolson, correct? But,
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry.
But none of your findings are contained anywhere in his medical chart. Would that be true?
Objection.
My findings were indicated in that I agreed with the care provided and what was done for the patient. It is not, you do not have to write a whole physical all over again if the patient's already been seen and evaluated by a physician assistant.
But according to this chart, you did not make one single note of the findings of your physical examination of Mr. Tolson. Would that be true?
Objection. Form and foundation asked and answered.
I did not write a physical exam over again. I reviewed what she wrote and agreed with it.
Do the policies at the hospital require emergency room physicians to make notes in the patient's chart when they physically examine a patient and to write their findings in the chart?
Objection, form and foundation.
Asked and answered, and she's not here to speak on behalf of the hospital and what's contained in its policies and procedures, but you can answer.
No. You don't have to go and write a whole note, a physical note. In the emergency room, we review and we indicate that we have reviewed it. We do our own exams, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to go write the whole chart over again.
Okay, I wasn't talking about writing the whole chart over again. My question was, and I think you've answered it, and I'll ask it again. I apologize if I misunderstood your answer. But the hospital's policies and procedures do not require an emergency room doctor such as yourself to note your physical findings in the chart after you physically examine a patient in the emergency room. Is that true?
Objection to form and foundation.
Same objection.
If you are seeing a patient with a physician assistant, it does, I mean, I don't know what the standard policy is at St. Agnes for that, but if you see the patient yourself, that's a different story, without a physician assistant involved. If someone else is involved, like a PA, then you don't have to, you don't have to write a whole nother note again.
Is there some written document that explains what you just said to us, that if a physician's assistant is examining the patient, you do not have to make a note of your separate evaluation of the patient chart? Is that written anywhere so we can look at it?
At St.
Objection.
Agnes?
Anywhere?
Objection to form and foundation.
I object as well.
I don't know, you'd have to go and ask St. Agnes about that. I don't know.
Now, when you were employed as an independent contractor to perform emergency room services at St. Agnes Hospital.
Just pause for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm okay, thank you, sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me start back. When you were employed, I'm sorry, who do you have an independent contractor agreement with?
I had an independent contractor agreement with M-Care.
M-Care?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, when you signed the agreement with M-Care, you knew you were going to be working at St. Agnes Hospital emergency room, correct?
Yes.
Did M-Care provide you with any written policies, procedures, or protocols that you were to follow for the treatment of patients at the emergency room at St. Agnes Hospital?
With regard to the care of treatment, or the care of the patients? Is that what you're referring to?
Did you understand my question, Doctor?
I believe so.
Okay, go ahead and answer it, please.
I suppose so, yes.
Okay, and do you have those documents with you?
No,
Do they exist somewhere?
probably.
And did you read them?
I probably did.
Okay, now,
I can't say I remember everything that was in there.
all right, now that's the documents we're talking about from M-Care. Now, the second question is, when you went to St. Agnes Hospital, did you have a meeting with the administrator of the hospital, welcome you on board, welcome you into the emergency room? Did you have that type of a meeting?
Objection.
Objection.
No, we didn't.
You just showed up at the ER and started working? I mean, if it happened, it's okay.
When
I just-
M-Care came on, I was already working for the hospital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you were actually employed by St. Agnes Hospital as an emergency room physician. Is that true?
No.
Objection.
Okay, all right. Then how were you employed originally by St. Agnes Hospital before M-Care came on board?
By a different ER group.
A different ER group?
Mhm.
Okay, what ER group was that?
Which one is it? Can't remember who it
Your
was
lawyer
before
can't help you.
M-Care. No, it's on my resume what the name of the group is. It was.
You can take a look at it. I think your lawyer has it for you if it'll help refresh your recollection.
Here, by the way, here's a copy of it.
Oh,
thank you.
Sterling. That's
Thank you,
right.
Counsel.
That's right. Sterling Healthcare.
Okay. So for 4 years, you were working at St. Agnes by and through Sterling Healthcare. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so you had been working at St. Agnes Hospital for 7 years in the emergency room department before you treated Mr. Tolson. Would that be a fair statement?
I'd have to add those up.
Well, 2002 to 2009, I count that as about 7 years. Would that be fair?
Yes, but I had worked there before, too. So I guess from that time period, yes.
Okay. Now, but you don't remember during that 7-year period looking at any hospital policies, procedures, or protocols that had to do with how a physician is supposed to note the chart in an emergency room?
Objection to form and foundation and scope.
You can answer.
Same objection, go ahead.
I'm sure I did.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what they said?
Objection.
Not word, no.
And it's your understanding that the policies and procedures that you looked at and reviewed did not require you yourself as the emergency room physician to make any notes in the patient's chart as to your own evaluations, as long as the physician's assistant had examined the patient beforehand?
Objection asked and answered. And don't speculate.
Okay. Now I lost the question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
May court reporter please read the question back.
And it's your understanding that the policies and procedures that you looked at and reviewed did not require you yourself as the emergency room physician to make any notes in the patient's chart as to your own evaluations, as long as a physician's assistant had examined the patient beforehand?
Same objections.
Same objections.
I can only tell you what our practice was. I don't know exactly what the wording was with that.
And is that a practice that you found to be true in all of the emergency rooms that you worked at in the state of Maryland?
Objection.
Each hospital has their own rules and regulations. Most time, I've worked with a number of physician assistants, and usually when you're working with them, you do not have to rewrite the whole chart. You sign off on what is already reviewed and written.
Now, and you found that to be true at other emergency rooms that you worked at in the state of Maryland?
Yes.
Okay. Now, who ordered the x-ray for Mr. Tolson's left knee? Oh, doctor, I'm sorry. If you need to take a break at any time, let us know.
Okay.
I forgot to tell you that. But back to my original question. Who ordered the x-ray for Mr. Tolson's left knee?
It was ordered by the PA, Krupa.
Physician's assistant?
Excuse me. Yes.
Okay. And I think in accordance with some of the requests for admissions that you actually did not speak personally to the radiologist while Mr. Tolson was in the emergency room, correct?
Objection.
No, there was no need to.
Okay. Now, did you look at the x-ray film itself?
That I don't recall. I know there was a report on the chart, and everything was negative, so it wasn't.
Okay, so the best of your
Wait,
recollection.
were you finished answering?
So it was, I took what the radiology reading was, and it was a pretty straightforward case, so no, I didn't. I don't remember if I looked at it myself. No.
Okay, so to the best of your recollection, you didn't speak with the radiologist regarding his interpretation. You didn't actually look at each of the films yourself. You relied upon what was written in the chart.
I relied upon the radiologist report.
The radiologist report?
Yes.
Are we talking about the report? Let's see if I can find it. Oh, on the report on page 24?
His question is if that written report is the one that you had in the emergency department caring for Mr. Tolson.
We usually got a electronic report. He would type in a preliminary exam. I can't say if this is the actual actual report that I saw in the ER. We usually get a preliminary report.
Where does that appear in the record?
I don't know.
Can you find that anywhere in the record?
I didn't notice it in there.
Wait, preliminary report on the computer, and now you're asking for her to look for it in the record?
I'm asking her if the preliminary report, and let me ask you this, do you know for sure whether you looked at a preliminary report on the record or relied upon that document that's in front of you at page 24?
Objection to form and foundation.
Objection.
There was a preliminary report on the PACS computer, the X-ray computer is what we get.
I'm sorry.
And sometimes he faxes over a preliminary report.
Faxes over a preliminary report?
Yes.
So do you believe in this case that you looked at the preliminary report that was faxed over to you?
Objection, foundation.
Same objection.
I believe I've looked at the preliminary report, yeah.
Okay. And tell me, what is the difference between the report on page 24 and the preliminary report?
Objection to form and foundation.
Same objections.
I mean, I'd have to have the other report to compare. I don't remember. You're asking me to remember a document from 3 years ago and compare it to this.
What is your recollection of the preliminary report?
No fractures.
Do you have
No
any
significant findings.
no fractures? What would you interpret to be a significant finding?
A fracture.
Is that it?
Fracture, dislocation, anything like that.
We got fracture dislocation. What else? Because I don't know what anything is, doctor.
That's it.
Okay.
In terms of evaluating the patient in their setting, yes.
Have you?
I'm sorry, that-
In terms of, I'm sorry, I speak soft. In terms of evaluating a patient in that setting, yes.
Would you go to page 15, please, for me?
What page are we on?
15, Counselor?
Thank you.
Are we there, doctor?
Yes.
That's where the
Okay.
X-ray results show.
Thank you.
In the bottom right-hand corner of page 15, it looks like someone wrote in there X-ray findings, the results of the X-rays. Do you know who did that?
You know, that looks like Krupa's with handwriting, I believe.
Okay. And do you believe now that after looking at that those more likely than not were the findings, the preliminary findings that you were talking about when you looked at this case back in December the 3rd, 2009?
Objection.
Those would have been that would have been information that she had, yes.
And would
So
that have
it's
been the information from the preliminary report from the
I would say
radiologist?
yes.
Objection.
I'm sorry, you keep
Speculation.
objecting, I can't hear your answer.
I would say yes, those would have been the results from the preliminary report.
Thank you. Okay. Now, did there come a time when you were aware of MRI findings from an MRI that was taken on December the 9th, 2009 at University of Maryland Hospital?
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again.
Did there come a time when you were aware of MRI findings from Mr. Tolson's left knee that were taken on December the 9th, 2009 at University of Maryland Hospital?
Objection, form and foundation.
No.
Okay. Show you what's marked as exhibit number 3. Why don't you take a look at that?
Can I ask a question?
First, before you read that, can you just tell us whether you've ever seen that before?
No.
Okay.
Okay. You've never seen exhibit number 3, which is UMMS, page 18.
I'm not privy to the
Can you-
records from the University of Maryland.
Can you
It-
identify the title of the document rather than
I'll
the
let you
page?
have
Because
it.
I'm not sure we're all using the same pages. Thank you.
Doctor, would it be fair to say that you're generally familiar with the anatomy of a patient's knee?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You're familiar with structures such as the anterior cruciate ligament, the posterior cruciate ligament, the popliteal tendon, also biceps femoris tendon, and lateral patellofemoral ligament, and the medial collateral ligament.
I'm familiar with them.
Okay. Doctor, the MRI report that's exhibit number 3, if you want to take a look at that, what I want to do is go over with you the structures that were found to have been damaged in Mr. Tolson's left knee as a result of the MRI on December 9, 2009.
For what purpose? She's not going to be testifying as an expert witness or with outside her scope as an emergency room physician. So to the extent you're going to be asking her about damage that was found later with the leg, I'm not going to permit her to answer that.
Doctor, have you treated patients that have had a tear of the anterior cruciate ligament?
Yes.
And have you treated patients that have had a tear of the posterior cruciate ligament?
I don't recall that one.
Okay. How about the medial collateral ligaments?
You know, in the ER,
Right.
there's a suspicion, but we don't know for sure of any tears anyway until they get an MRI.
Right.
Because it's not an emergent test and it doesn't need to be done.
Now, for a patient such as Mr. Tolson, who had injuries to 6, it looks like 6 of the structures that are responsible for stabilizing his knee, do you believe that the trauma that he sustained to his knee was significant in light of the findings on the MRI report?
Objection.
Objection.
I'm not going to let her answer that question. She's not here as an expert witness. She's here to testify about her care and treatment of Mr. Tolson on December 3rd, 2009, and nothing more.
Doctor, for patients that you have examined who've had tears to the anterior cruciate ligament and other ligaments in the knee, do those patients, can that cause instability in a patient's knee?
Objection.
Objection.
Again, the way it's phrased, you're asking her to testify based on a diagnosis that she's already testified is not made in the emergency department.
It's not why I'm asking the question. I'll ask a question again, and I'll see if you can answer it. In your experience, patients who have had damage to ligaments, tendons, and muscles that are supposed to hold the knee together, if they have damage to those ligaments, tendons, muscles, can that cause instability within a patient's knee?
I'm going to object. If you can answer that question within your area of expertise and not expand beyond it, go ahead.
Objection.
There's too many variables for me to just say yes or no to that question. There's too many degrees of injury. There's too many different ligaments to hold the knee together. And
Okay.
that's not something that ER doctors, we're worried about diagnosing.
Are you telling me that an ER doctor is not worried about diagnosing a patient's injury to their knee if the patient's knee has the types of injuries that Mr. Tolson had that were borne out by the MRI, that ER doctor is not worried about rendering a diagnosis of those injuries to the patient's knee?
Object Performance Foundation, you're going to have to rephrase that.
Do you understand the question, doctor?
Well, that's not the point. I don't understand the question.
Well,
wait, just let me put on the record that
if you could do a speaking objection, the witness needs to leave.
that's fine.
Ma'am, would you have a seat outside?
Don't forget you have a microphone on. The basis for my objection is the foundation that's been laid here is the diagnosis that you keep reading from that MRI report are not made by emergency room physicians in an emergency department. So then you read the diagnosis to her and ask her that's not a diagnosis you're concerned about making. It's circular. They don't make those diagnoses typically in the emergency department, and so I don't think the question is fair the way you asked it.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the
Can we
doctor?
take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
Fine with me.
We're going off the record of the minutes, 12:17 p.m.